Good morning, everyone. First of all, I think to start off with, we should just offer our condolences to Tanzania. They had floodings yesterday, and I believe 47 folks suffered deaths, and they had 85 people injured as a consequence of this flooding in the Hanang district. So our condolences to our friends and our neighbors in the next pavilion. I think based on that, this conversation is even more important as we talk about the resilience of municipal and African city infrastructure. We have today with us a number of distinguished panelists, starting with our executive mayor from Tshwane, Councillor Celias Brink from South Africa. Welcome, Executive Mayor. As well as the other panelists, we have Dr. Megan Spires, Mr. Banwell from Jeff, a very close partner for the DBSA, Ms. Kamari from TDB, and we also have just joined as the moderator for today's session. Welcome. We're grateful that you could make it through the queues. Very important for us in this discussion, we are acutely aware of the impact of climate change on infrastructure, especially in African cities where we have a backlog of infrastructure, and we also have infrastructure that hasn't been maintained properly for many, many years. We've seen how infrastructure is destroyed by the impact of climate change, and people are displaced from their homes, or places of work are also destroyed, so they're not really restored as soon as they were before. So municipalities are losing rates and taxes which are sorely needed for service delivery. There's a whole gambit of interventions across our different partnerships. Some of them are here today to deal with the resilience of infrastructure in our cities. At the DBSA specifically, we try to do so on a programmatic basis. So we have a number of strategic initiatives that we are focused on. I won't go into detail. The team is here to discuss them with you if you need any more details. But really, it's around resilient infrastructure, adaptation, finance, taking care of water and energy security. A few days ago, when the President came to address us, there was a lady as a precursor from the Eastern Cape, Ms. Betani, who presented this artwork that you see to our right, this tapestry. A beautiful, beautiful story. You know, we all live in the heights of technocrats and climate ideologists, but this really brought it home to us in terms of the work we're trying to do, because it provided the human face of the impact of climate change. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this tapestry, but it shows the journey towards our net zero goals. Important about this tapestry is that it shows how flooding, how droughts led to the community seeing less fish in their waters. So they were not able to make the same income they used to before. They were not able to feed themselves, and they also had many health problems as a result of climate change. This makes this discussion today even more important. So I will not waste any more time. First of all, we'd like to ask the Executive Mayor to come up and just give us a small presentation or discussion around their work in Tshwane. And then the rest of the panel will take over. Thank you, everyone. The Executive Mayor. Are you plugged in? Sorry, she's coming to help you.
Right. I'm a plug-and-play mayor. Good morning, folks. Thanks very much for the opportunity to participate in this panel and have this discussion. The city of Tshwane includes South Africa's administrative capital, Pretoria. As a city government, we serve about 3.8 million people, massive geographical area, and of course, a number of pressing challenges. Now, in the ordinary course of life, people are drawn to cities, better education, better jobs, better healthcare, and unfortunately, for many reasons, we are unable to manage that pressure as a city and as a country, and to deliver on this promise of a better life that people seek from us. The reasons for this are manifold, and it will be disingenuous just to say, oh, it's only climate change. But climate change is definitely a factor, and it will gain force in the times ahead. Tshwane has got a hinterland of about 4 provinces that are very rural, got large rural bases, but of course a hinterland beyond our own borders in the countries of Southern Africa and even beyond. And these are the places from which we draw those folks in search of a better life. Now, among various other problems that we need to solve as a city and a country, anemic economic growth in the past decades, falling tax revenues, procurement laws and regulations which are less than helpful sometimes at getting value for money, resistant and entrenched networks of corruption, and quite frankly, an outdated and ineffective funding model for local government. Climate change may well be the factor least understood and least spoken about. But as we know, Africa is, of course, downstream from the consequences of carbon emissions produced elsewhere. While we have benefited significantly from increased global economic output, the ecological downside that we are suffering is disproportionate to the rest of the world. Yet you will not hear phrases such as climate refugees in the public discourse in South Africa. And the more or less elite forums where this is discussed is very often separated from ordinary understanding of the basic effects of climate change. I became the mayor of Tshwane in about March this year, and of course inherited a lot of problems, but the one good thing I inherited was a very strong, well-capacitated sustainability unit that has got a lot of influence on policy making, and that is quite unique in our country. We have done 2 climate risk and vulnerability assessments, the latest of which informed our climate action plan of 2022. In the process, we have confirmed that average temperatures in our city have increased 1.8 degrees Celsius since 1960. We've mapped the risks according to geography and extent, and now know where our biggest vulnerabilities are. The first city in South Africa to have developed climate risk zones. Our climate action plan commits us to taking measures to mitigate the effects of these risks and to stop these climate risk zones from growing. Using our smart climate tools, our existing capital planning system, CAPS for short, already enables us to understand the spatial effects of our capital projects. The essence of our risk, and this is the nub of the problem, is that migration and population growth will outstrip our ability to maintain, build, and replenish infrastructure and to conserve our natural environment. This risk could manifest in various ways. Floods causing displacement of human settlements. In the past century, Tswane's 300 wetlands have been reduced to about 30 at present. While South Africa's housing and human settlement laws seek to protect the most vulnerable communities, unfortunately, they sometimes have the effect of making it very difficult to prevent human settlements from developing in floodplains and other risky areas. The contamination of natural water sources might reach a point where our wastewater treatment plants are unable to deal with the organic and the hydraulic load. Bearing in mind that this infrastructure is already very old and has suffered from years of underinvestment, this is a significant risk. In fact, Tshwane recently had an outbreak of what we had thought to be medieval disease or something that happens somewhere else, cholera. And many people drew the link between that outbreak and the underperformance of one critical wastewater treatment plant. Now, that was not scientifically established, but the point is, it drew the national attention to the problems around wastewater treatment. Increasingly unbearable heat, so-called urban heat, islands where formalized services and amenities are least available, including access to housing, piped water, and regular waste collection services. Tshwane has about 500 informal settlements, roughly estimated, and we only have the resources to provide rudimentary services to about 150 of those. It comes at a high expense, made all the more expensive by local extortion rackets, including sometimes councillors who exact all sorts of payments in order for ordinary people just to enjoy basic services. All this is made worse by a dangerously outdated model of waste management. Our landfills are filling up, and yet in South Africa, we lack a compelling model of waste to energy, and we also lack an effective model of recycling, separation at source being largely the preserve of the middle class and the well-off. So to manage these risks, we need tools, we need plans, and we need strategies, but we also need funding. And in this regard, I just want to make a few observations, none of them novel, but critical to restate at this point. Lack of access to climate-specific funding and budgeting inhibits our ability to be resilient and to reduce our vulnerabilities. Cities need access to vast amounts of funding. We need lower yields, lower capital, longer terms, and specific climate benefits. Sustainability interventions cannot be funded like everything else. Green infrastructure investment should carry a discounted rate for cost of capital, reflective of the need to move away from traditional infrastructure provision. Funders should rethink project risks for green projects, or else what provides the incentives for governments and cities to change to sustainability. And many of the crises present opportunities, especially in energy, massive opportunities along with the crises. Same with wastewater treatment. We need devolution of functions, and I would say devolution of revenue-raising powers as well. And lastly, the traditional conception of creditworthiness and credit rating methodologies must necessarily change. Investments could be structured in a way that manages risk. And while South Africa has got tremendously sophisticated and intricate laws in the Municipal Finance Management Act in particular, often these are a straitjacket for getting out of problems such as these. But of course, we can't just be saying more money, give us interesting ways of getting money. We also have to manage the risks. And what we have done from our side as a city government, first and foremost, appoint competent, capable, apolitical managers, because a capable administration is crucially important. Johan Mettler, our city manager, has got a track record of excellence and of standing up to corruption, which is important in our context. We've recruited a full complement of managers that report to the senior manager, including a new CFO, and we're committed to measures such as the C40 climate budget initiative, which will allow us to use our framework of decision-making and allocating budget and mainstream climate priorities, framing it in terms of our needs and the needs of ordinary people for energy, for clean water, and for effective waste collection. So that is the commitment from our side, and I believe the commitment from many other cities in South Africa. And the role of cities in making this change, in unlocking the opportunities, in reducing the risk for potential investors has to be acknowledged, and greater opportunities must be given for that. Thank you very much. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. That was really fantastic, and I think gives us a really great context to start this conversation on the specific challenges of accessing climate and nature finance for African cities. I think you highlighted a few things that I'm hoping that the organizations here who fund this type of work are listening to, the very real challenges of the very practical challenges you mentioned of around fiscal management, of the sort of powers, the taxation, the regulatory challenges, and those are things that I think all of our cities need a lot more help in. I wanted to just quickly introduce another panel member who got stuck in the massive wave of people who arrived at security just like me, and my apologies for that. It's Mr. Pradana Murthy, the Director of Risk Management at PTSMI. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us here today. This is a really important issue to be discussing. Amongst our membership of 97 cities around the world, adaptation and finance are the top priorities. This is the biggest issue that all of our cities are really clamoring for support on. So it's really fantastic to have this discussion with financial institutions and with partners who can support those cities. 650 million city residents around the world will face water scarcity in 2050. 1.6 billion city residents will face extreme heat by 2050. And within our membership, 98% of C40 cities are already facing severe climate threats. As I think we all know, this is not a crisis that is in the future, this is a crisis that is here now. And of course, it's, as you heard from the mayor, it's the vulnerable communities that are most at risk. And while these problems are not unique to Africa, we all know that in Africa, these risks are disproportionately affecting the population, and that we have 60% of the urban population in Africa lives in informal settlements or slums, which makes this issue so much more challenging in terms of getting the right infrastructure in place. But the finance is a challenge because projects that address climate risk, that help cities to adapt, tend to not be bankable. There aren't quite the revenue streams. They need to be structured in very specific ways in order to make them financially viable. There is, of course, a strong economic case for these projects because of what they do to protect GDP, livelihood, allowing cities to function. But of course, it's hard to capture some of the value for that and translate that into a bankable project. In our membership, most of our cities tend to self-finance these projects because they don't find those external sources. And in many of the panels where I sit on with banks, they say, well, these projects aren't bankable. And that's why only 9% of tracked urban climate finance goes to adaptation, which is pretty shameful. But there are some real challenges in this space. And we've talked about finance, but I think the mayor highlighted a really important issue, which is understanding your vulnerabilities and what that means spatially. And I think the support cities need, it is finance, but it's also funding. It's funding to do proper plans, to do proper risk assessments, to get good data in place. Because there are companies out there saying, well, you know, insurance, is that a solution for cities? But you need really good data for those types of very sophisticated finance mechanisms. So this is another area where I think cities need a lot of support. So on our panel today, we're going to be discussing some of the specific challenges within African cities. But we've also brought in the gentleman from PTSMI, which is the National Development Bank of Indonesia, a country also facing massive climate risk, to see if we can also do a bit of learning from Indonesian example. And we've got, of course, Alok here from the Global Environment Facility, which works globally on these issues. So let me get started with Dr. Megan Spires from ICLEI Africa. Can you help us just understand the context in African cities? What are the unique challenges that they face? And how are they trying to integrate climate resilience into their urban planning and attract finance to adapt to a changing climate?
Thanks, and thanks for having ICLEI here. I think the first thing to say is that we work with all sizes of cities, and in general, our smaller municipalities have very limited capacity and resources to tackle climate change. And I think one of the big disservices we've done, and I think we've been partly to blame as in essence climate change activist over all these years, is to separate climate change from development. One cannot separate climate change from development, and I think the Mayor of Tshwane aptly put it that climate change is simply overlaying existing developmental challenges that municipalities, local governments across Africa are already facing. And so I think there's also been a disservice done if we think about the additionality criteria that have come into play for a lot of these global funds, not just because it's hard to separate climate change from development, but also because one of the big challenges our municipalities face is clear downscaled climate change information at a localized level, at a fine enough scale to be able to direct exactly what projects and programs they would like to see. Some of the solutions that we've been putting in place to tackle this particular issue, and I particularly like this phrasing, is humble science. So it's using things like climate risk narratives where climate scientists look at potential scenarios, hotter and wetter, drier and hotter, and then workshop with municipal officials in terms of what would these futures look like in their city, so they can really grapple with the overlay of climate change on developmental issues. And I particularly like this tapestry because in a sense it does a similar thing. It visualizes what climate change will bring to these particular cities. So I think the first point I wanted to make was around the fact that we can't separate climate change from development, and that also means that climate change plans should ideally not be separate documents. And again, referring to the Tshwane input earlier, what was interesting to see is how, yes, there is a separate climate change plan, but it has been integrated and mainstreamed into existing key core documents within the municipality. And at the moment, we're working with another South African municipality called Steve Tshwete Local Municipality. It's in the coal heartland of South Africa. And it's taken years and years of building trust and working long-term with this municipality to a point now where they've opened up their IDP to ICLEI and said, right, the first ever just transition chapter in our IDP. And I think these steps that can only be taken through trust, through long-term relationships in these municipalities are absolutely key to move climate change from being a separate add-on additional resource issue. The final point I wanted to make relates to the opening remarks around funding, because we've got cities across Africa, many of which have developed comprehensive climate change plans, most often with external donor funding, but these sit mostly in plans. And this relates very much to finance and funding. So, two things here where we found greater levels of success. One is to evaluate what a municipality is already going to be doing with current budget, and then model how could we make these projects more climate resilient? You're going to build a road, but if there's going to be increased flooding in your city, how do you make that road more resilient? Do you change its location? So it's this overlay of what the climate change impacts would be on existing developments, and then use that external funding to bridge that gap or that divide between existing resources and what would be needed to make that infrastructure climate resilient. The second is to work with DFIs and donors and funders that are interested and willing to walk this road with municipalities. And in this case, I have to say DBSA is one of the leading DFIs that's really serious about looking at its own project preparation facilities and finding ways that they can be accessed by municipalities. And this means that we need to support knowledge broker organizations that can bridge the language data divides between DFIs and donors and municipalities to assist them to actually unlock that finance. And historically and still currently, that is drastically under-resourced. Most of the project preparation money goes towards hardcore science, engineering, EIAs, not to the financing, which for us is vital to get a municipal project across the line, which is in bridging the divides between financiers and municipal officials. So, in summary, the context is that, as already has been said, municipalities are facing climate change right now. They're taking it seriously. There is political will. There's often this conversation of there isn't political will. There is. But what is lacking now is better integration, not separating climate change from development, and more finance for technical assistance to take projects from idea stage through to bankability and implementation.
Fantastic, Meg. So I think you've highlighted a couple things that lead us onto my next question for Alok, which is around, the challenge here is that integration and integrating the resilience with development, but also integrating this into budgeting, into planning, into climate risk assessments that's done with every bit of infrastructure that a city is looking to build out. So, Alok, we know that the Global Environment Facility is a big supporter, big champion for cities, but for specifically on this topic of integrated planning around the world. Can you comment on why this integration is so critical specifically for urban resilience? And given the kind of climate change impacts that we see in different regions, how can cities tailor their resilience plans to suit different contexts? We've got a diverse panel from different regions here, so love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, sure. It's working? Yeah. Thanks, Andrea, and what a great start of this discussion. So I really liked the art here. And when we started our program like 6-7 years back, it was a real challenge for us to explain integration, why cities need to take integrated approaches. It was like that, okay, let's do solar, let's do waste management, let's do sectoral interventions, and we were trying to champion that. No, let's bring all of them together, embed it within the urban development, urban growth story in a more holistic way. But I'm glad that now we don't have to convince this, because you see the art, it shows the integration very clearly. We heard from Mayor very clearly on how everything is coming up and how all of the issues and challenges and opportunities are interlinked. So building on that, the integration approach is something that we are really advancing. From our perspective, why we really think integration is important is, particularly for regions like Africa, is it's one of the fastest growing urbanizing regions. When we talk about rapid urbanization problem, it is in Africa, and this is the time when we need to really work, work together on addressing some of the challenges that were highlighted and the opportunities. But these are multifaceted. These are not, and they are interlinked. So you can't address one challenge in an isolated manner, because all are interlinked. And that is why this integration is so important. What we do, or what is our approach? So first we look at integration more from a systems-based perspective. Because cities are systems. They are economic systems. We can't address one issue without looking at this entire system, which is so well depicted here. And that is our main premise why we work in cities, why we support cities program. Jeff has been funding climate change, biodiversity, and other interventions over the last 30 years. This we started only 8 years back, and the principle was that we need to target these economic systems, make them resilient, and make them low carbon, because that's how we can achieve the global environmental benefits that we have, that we want to achieve. So for us, we want to have this integration approach because it delivers multiple environmental benefits and resilience benefits in cities. We look at 3 aspects of integration. First is the institutional integration. You know, cities operate in their own system, but cities are also linked with national governments. You talked about devolution, you talked about, you know, different level of governance. So one of the areas that we work on is how we can facilitate this vertical integration between cities, provincial governments and national governments, and that's where we are so proud to partner with institutions like C40 and ICLE to make that happen. So that's one. The second aspect is spatial integration, where most of the cities which are expanding, particularly in Africa, or growing, they are growing like metropolitan cities with multiple municipalities. So the approach that we are taking is how do we bring them together to achieve the economies of scale of services or infrastructure or solutions. And also, that spatial integration is important to avoid urban sprawl. Because what is happening is when cities are expanding, they're not expanding in proportion to population growth. They're just expanding land, which is often not efficient in terms of ecological footprint. And that is contributing to both vulnerability as well as to greenhouse gas emissions and loss of nature. And finally, which is something that has clearly emerged from cities, is integration of nature in cities. And that is really important, particularly for Africa, which is growing so fast, which is endowed with natural resources. And at this juncture, this is the period when nature has to be part of the urban growth story. It can't be just a good thing to have. It has to be mainstreamed, as Megan said, in the urban development agenda and all future investments. So it can't be just brown, gray infrastructure when Africa is growing its cities. It has to be with nature, and that is very, very important for us. And these three approaches are what defines our program, and it's not our program. When we say our program, it is actually all cities program, all our partners are proposing, and this leads to resilience. This leads to urban biodiversity. This leads to mitigation, avoiding land degradation, because cities are the spaces where we can achieve all these global environmental benefits. Of course, climate change is one, but then there is biodiversity, there is land degradation, and there are conventions around that. So we would like to use these integrated approaches to give cities the influence in all these global conventions and achieve the global goals. So supporting them, act locally, but achieving the global goals is what we are achieving through our integrated approaches.
Is that working? Okay, thank you so much, Alok. And I love what you said, and I'm going to put that in quotes. Nature needs to be part of the urban growth story. And it's something that I think we all need to really think about, that integration from as you said, institutional, spatial, and finance, which we'll come to a little bit later. So I'm going to turn to Ms. Mary Kamari from TDB. So we've talked a lot about planning, but of course the plans need to result in implementation and projects and finance. So I mentioned earlier how it can be challenging to develop climate resilience and nature projects given the lack of revenue streams and bankability. What are some of the financing mechanisms that are available to finance these kind of projects? What is your bank looking at in this space?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me on the panel. I'll just start by saying that most banks these days recognize the challenges government and private sector face in addressing impact of climate change. These are things we're seeing in the market that is really we are struggling with as banks. We are going through a transition. So at the Trade and Development Bank, we've gone through a transition phase, a major transition phase to come from what we were doing before and going into climate-related initiatives. We've developed our strategy and also come up with our own taxonomy to define what green is. Reason why we did that, we had to engage different countries that we support to find out what exactly is green, because most people are coming from brown to light to green, and in different sectors. So we found this as a very difficult challenges the government and private sector were facing. We've intervened in the mitigation space, in the renewable energy, wind, hydro, geothermal in different countries, and also in the adaptation space. And to do this, we needed financing. So we had, of course, the general lines of credit. We're in trade finance, and also infrastructure finance. So we had lines of credit that was not really specifically speaking to the climate or green areas. So what we did was to work closely with our development partners that have been with us for a long time to come up with different instruments. We've now have very many lines of credit which is green, and we're looking actively, I may use the word actively, looking for project in the climate space. So we have lines of credit dedicated to green. We also have branded finance, which is also speaks to the green. But most importantly, we have developed, we're the first development financial institution on the continent that has developed a green share. And this is built on the first phase that we introduced 10 years ago, targeting institutional investors, mainly pension funds, insurance companies that were looking for returns 10 years ago. So we had many pension funds invest in us. We were owned by the government, 25 government in our Eastern and Southern Africa. And we introduced a share called Class B shares, targeting pension funds, insurance companies, and we've been paying dividends to these pension funds. So what we saw was a track record. We were paying dividends, and when this climate issue came in place, we issued green shares, and we've just signed up last week with our first anchor investor, a like-minded entity that is looking for also returns. So we are also actively looking for investors that are also looking to invest in these shares. But yes, we have these shares, we are going to pay returns. What were you seeing to the clients? What challenge were they facing? Mostly, I think one of the panelists here talked about development capital. So with this, talking about municipalities, we don't intervene directly to the municipalities, but we lend to sovereigns. The underlying transactions are mainly to the municipalities. What we see in the market in that area is most of them face development capital, which is project preparation. And I think one of the panel talked about DBSA setting up that space. You'll find that most government are facing that space. How do we develop projects to be able to make it attractive? And also guarantee it to be able to be more attractive. So this has been one of the areas that we look at whenever we look at opportunity in that space. We definitely look at branded finance, which is debt, equity, as well as guarantees. The shares that we introduced, which is green shares, that is aligned to green growth, we got an anchor investor who gave us those shares and is able to set up a project preparation fund for us to be able to give a whole holistic value of the project. So we will pay dividends to the investor. At the same time, we will create the unit that will be able to support in the early stage of development. So that's the approach we've taken. We're also introducing, we are actively in the market looking at the hybrid instrument. Of course, the investors that we'll be looking at is investors looking for green project. So most people have issued green bonds, and what we are also hearing in the market is the use of process is difficult because they can't find project in the market. Again, it boils down to the whole value chain of a project. In short, I would say, listening to the ones I've spoken, is most of these projects require soft and patient capital in the market.
Mayor, that is really fascinating, and I have not actually heard a model like that, because the institutional investors, that's where the money is, right? That they have way more money, sorry to say, than all of the development banks in the world combined. But it's really hard to tap into that for something like this space. So I will come back to you later to hear more about this green share. But I think the other interesting thing you mentioned, this taxonomy going from brown, white to green, which is I think part of the challenge that banks have in shifting to different types of solutions, and nature-based solutions are very different from, building, a gray stormwater system. It's a very different approach, requires different types of project preparation, different way to think about these things. So the banks also need to evolve and innovate. So with that, we're going to hear from a different region. Mr. Pradana Murthy, who's the Director of Risk Management at PTSMI, which is the National Development Bank of Indonesia. So Indonesia faces also massive climate risk, maybe a different set of risks than what you see in Africa. What have you seen as innovative financing mechanisms or public-private partnerships that can help cities to fund these climate resilient initiatives?
Okay, thank you, Andrea, and thank you for to this talk show. Yeah, and apologies for being late. Yeah. First, I would like to briefly introduce our institutions, which is what Andrea called as National Development Bank. We're actually still a corporation, a limited liability entity. However, our mandate is clear that we have to support national development agenda through providing various innovative solutions in financing. Yeah. So SMI is a $7.6 billion company. And I would just like to highlight that although the majority of our financing portfolio goes to the private sectors, almost 1/3 of our financing portfolio is in the municipalities or subnational government. Yeah. So more than $2 billion that we have dispersed to projects and programs in municipalities, be it small and medium size of urban areas up to large metropolitan areas like Jakarta. So our lesson learned from providing municipal financings has evolved. Yeah. So we started from, I think the key to this is using financings as a tool for development. Yeah. And this time is a climate aware, climate aware development. So the question is how to actually invite or demand for credit. Is because it's not easy. It's not easy to tell local governments, hey, why don't you borrow money from us? It's not easy at all. So we started with affirmative pricing policy, which we started with a pricing strategy that is just a little bit above our sovereign government yield. And that has culminated in quite a substantial amount of demand for credit. And then from then, we coupled together with project development funds, and we team up with people like World Bank, AIIB, Swiss Contacts. We also, together with them, developing best practices and helping municipalities to develop their projects which in line with IFC standards and the likes. So that's a huge success, but it's nowhere near what we would hope for, because our total municipalities in Indonesia is 548, and right now, up to this point, we only serve around 100 of them. So it's still a long way to go. Um, but the coming of COVID pandemic, yeah, although it's disastrous, but in the flip side, it comes as an opportunity for us, whereby the demand for credit actually grow from the COVID pandemic. Yeah, the revenue of municipalities reduce, therefore they need liquidity to actually continue their programs. Yeah. Therefore, our next evolution is to provide pricing policies, affirmative pricing policies that's even lower than we have provided, and that is fully backed up by our government. Our government provided that funding that will require us to really concessional types of financing to municipalities. And that's a huge success. That's why now we have more than $2 billion worth of financing portfolio in municipalities. And we can actually put more in the project developments in how to actually prepare projects and programs that is in line with climate mitigation and adaptation. And most of our projects are actually in, like, for example, in water sectors, hospitals, yeah. And even I remember we have a breakwater coastal barriers, yeah, that actually have a dual functions of recreational area as well as breakwater dam to protect the coastal area. So I think we have some success, and again, we need to evolve more to be able to have more internal affirmative policy. And now we are embarking towards a more affirmative policy in terms of capital allocations. So our capital allocations is going to be put more, the vast majority of it is going to be for the municipal financing. So that's one area that we are continuously hope to actually improve, yeah, and expand. And the second area is PPP, as you mentioned. PPP, so far we have been involved in project development as well as financing of 22 PPP projects. Most of them are in the water sector. Water sector is quite one way to look at it is quite problematic in Indonesia because we have quite a low coverage of water supply. But on the flip side, it can also, if it's structured right, it can present opportunities for private sector to invest. Yeah. So our government provided a framework that introduced project development facilities, viability gap fund, as well as a guarantee and availability payment. So we have quite a complete government support structure that can enable a feasible and bankable PPP projects. So that's our open for municipalities to actually subscribe to.
Super. That's great to hear about the increased capital commitment as well as the opportunity to access the concessional finance and the availability of guarantees, which are things we keep hearing from our cities are really key. I'm going to turn to you, Mayor Brink. You were part of an announcement yesterday with C40 and the Urban Water Accelerator. Can you tell us a little bit around why you made that commitment, which is a commitment to adapting urban water management to a changing climate? It requires cities to protect the most vulnerable communities, including looking at early warning systems. And then Shwana has made some specific commitments under that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, water is crucial for us. It's at the forefront of the basic services that we deliver and that we're responsible for. But crucially also, it's a trading service for the municipality. In other words, we're meant to make a small surplus on it to maintain our network and to maintain our ability to deliver the service over time. Unfortunately, a lot of what is happening in the water space is very outdated, our way of managing water resources. We've got a very outdated manner of doing wastewater and wastewater treatment where new technologies such as bioremediation don't even feature. So that's essential to us not just for sustainability of the environment and the resource, but also financial sustainability, our ability to maintain the infrastructure and to secure that as a revenue stream, because without revenue streams, you can't offer anything bankable. So that is the importance of water to us.
All right, there we go. So I'm going to just give one more question to each of you, but I'm going to ask you to keep it quite short, if you can, to 1 minute, just because we want to give a little bit of time for questions at the end, and there's another panel starting right at 10:30. Okay, so let me go back to you, Megan. Could you share with us one concrete example that you've seen that can inspire us, that can show some success from the region?
I think what I would say is that we have seen a lot of success, and I'm specifically talking about the adaptation resilience space, but it's small scale. So it's lots of really exciting projects underway. It's exactly what the IPCC says in their 6th assessment report, but it's fragmented, it's sector specific, and there are these rays of hope. I think our call from ICLEI's side would be to say, how do we take these rays of hope? We've done a lot of experimenting now at the small scale that shows what adaptation and building resilience projects can look like at the city scale. And now how do we scale this, but still in a context-specific way? So I think about it almost like a funnel with which we can still allow these small-scale projects, which is what's necessary for adaptation, but it should be part of a framework that a city leads, that a country leads, that's going somewhere clear and coherent. And then having the conversations with the banks, the funders, and the DFIs to fund these broader systematic approaches, but that still allow for these nuanced successes. That is what you need in the adaptation space.
So much. Thank you so much. And I know that was a difficult one to ask, but yeah, I think you're exactly right. Adaptation, it's not one big project. It's a lot of interventions that need to take place to tackle all this. Alok, I know when we were planning this session, you said it's not just about climate finance, it's nature finance. And there's some new funds that have come out, Biodiversity Fund including one of these. Can you tell us about what are some of those finance options that might exist in terms of nature for supporting this type of work?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with the data. I was looking at some data, particularly for Africa. Just on the climate finance perspective, there was a report by the Climate Policy Initiative which said that only 11% of the total climate finance need goes to Africa. And that also probably goes only to the national governments, or how much of that goes to city governments is definitely probably lower. And then if you filter it down further, how much of that goes for interventions which are not bankable, as we were discussing, particularly the nature-based solutions. So there are certain solutions where we have got the economy of scale, we have got the market, we got the supply chain, we have got some of the national banks, international banks ready to fund. But then there are many, like nature-based solutions in cities. Suppose if a city wants to restore a wetland around it to ensure there is ecosystem services, clean water, clean air, flooding, there is not much investment around those solutions. So, and for those solutions, maybe climate finance coming out of this COP may not be sufficient. So that's why there is a very strong case that we make within ourselves, with our council, with our city partners, is that because we are talking about integrated approach, let's talk about integrated finance also, because climate, biodiversity, land, all these things are interlinked. It's not that, okay, let's only talk about climate mitigation, we'll talk about adaptation in a different project, we'll talk about biodiversity, all are interlinked. And that's why what we do in our cities program, till date we have committed around $500 million in grant, supporting more than 100 cities across 34 countries. And that $500 million includes climate finance, it includes biodiversity finance, coming from the Convention of Biodiversity, that for which the JEF is a financing mechanism, and also coming from the UNCCD's finance, for which also we are the financing mechanism. So the JEF is the financing mechanism of these three conventions, and we blend all the three finances that we get for cities, because we think the best places, the best economic or systems where we can achieve all these global goals of this decade is from cities, because it provides scale, it provides the inspirational leadership from mayors like you to make things work. And so that's what we are doing. We are trying to address the externalities of some of the solutions for which there is not a ready market for investment. We are trying to create enabling conditions. For example, in Indonesia, our project with World Bank, in cities like Surabaya, Bitung, and others, we are helping them develop, pipeline of projects, trying to invest in some of the pilot solutions, build innovative financing mechanisms for PPP, or to leverage bonds and other mechanisms to invest. So that's what we are trying to do, bring finance from all the sources that is possible within our capacity, and very importantly, to leverage finance from others. And we have amazing partnership with DBSA in South Africa, with World Bank and with C40 and their finance facility. So our interest is that through our, catalytic finance, we can leverage more. So I know you have a big investment pipeline for Africa. We want to work with you to make sure that, or to help you to ensure that your flow of finance to cities is for some of these solutions which normally won't get investment, but we would like to help you to get investments in those areas. So that's what we are trying to do with partners like you and many others.
And we thank you enormously. Both ICLEI and C40 work very closely with the JEF, and the support is really fantastic from from this global fund that works in such a collaborative way with cities and with the city networks. We're incredibly grateful for that support. Mary, and if you could try to keep it to 1 minute, can you summarize from your banking perspective, what is it that investors are looking for in terms of opportunity?
Just maybe to give the background of TDB itself, the Trade Development Bank, in terms of the pension funds that have invested in the bank 8 years ago or 10 years ago, most of the investors that we targeted were pension funds. Most people are saying funds have a lot of money, they're not investing in the bank. We kind of surprised many entities on the continent by bringing in 20 institutional investors into a DFI on the continent. We are one of the few that were able to invest in. Why did we do that? Of course, it boils down to governance, profitability. So we did clean up the bank, we made it profitable, and we went on the market, we're investment grade, went to the market and raised that money. Our target was pension funds in our continent that knew the bank itself. Our commitment was a return on equity of above 10% in dollar terms. So they were looking for good returns. So to your question, what are they looking for? Good returns. Most of the pension funds have invested in government securities to be more safe. So we proved to them by paying dividends. For the last 8 years, we've been paying dividends, and our return on equity has been above 10%. You don't get it in the market in dollar terms. So what we're seeing in the other African countries, because of the debt issues our countries are facing, they've kind of gone back to the pension funds to say, we need financing from you. But not many pension funds will be able to invest in municipalities because it's risky, right? Which requires de-risking it with branded finance. But also, most importantly, there are opportunities right now of guarantees to invest in the local currency other than the banks that are providing in dollar terms. So your question, to answer to your question, is good returns.
Fantastic. Great. And Pradana, we know that that climate risks are changing and evolving, getting worse, obviously, over time. How can you develop adaptive strategies as new information, technology emerge, as these issues are changing, becoming harder to predict?
Yes, I think the role of us as NDBs, as intermediaries, yeah, is really important to bridge the gap between municipalities or local governments, as well as private sectors, central governments, NGOs, even technological best practices that you mentioned. Yeah. So I think I've mentioned a few of the tools that we can provide, like technical assistance, project development facility, building. So we've done that on a project and program level, as well as a regular occurrence. Yeah. Um, so that is important, but we are going to step it up a bit, and we're going to follow the lead of MDBs because they have this kind of country partnership framework, and we are going to develop a similar kind of strategies on a sub-national level. So sub-national partnership framework that is basically going to be across the board approach, starting from planning, capacity buildings, setting up a debt management office, that kind of thing. And we want to make sure that from the planning process that they have included all these safeguards and climate actions on mitigation and adaptations as much as possible in their planning. So that is going to be the next phase of our evolutions, and we are committed to that. Yeah.
That is really fantastic to hear. One of the things we at C40, the City's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, CCFLA, and the Global Covenant of Mayors released this week was a report looking at what is the urban angle to MDB reform. And one of the key recommendations is around this strategy. Can we get the banks to elevate urban as a key strategy and to have those dedicated programs and approaches? And it's amazing to hear you're going to have a subnational framework in your country partnership strategy, because I think the big challenge with urban is it's not usually part of these country strategies that are agreed between national governments and the banks. And if it's not there, then it's not prioritized. So big congratulations to you for pushing that forward. Mayor Brink, I'm going to ask you, what is your ask? So you are here at COP, meeting a lot of different funders, partners, financial institutions. What could really support Shwani in addressing these issues? What is your message? What is your ask for the community here that can help you out?
So our top priorities are electricity and water. I'm not going to go into the details because I know we're running out of time. But in essence, what we need is investment in one compelling project. Because all of the preparation in many of these cities, members of C40, has been done. The governance structures, the preparations, and so forth. And what we need are those one or two catalytical projects that are going to change the game and show that in fact all of the commitment that has been done can actually translate into tangible results. And the offer from our side, and I believe many other cities, is to make the changes on the inside to manage that risk. So come, have a look at our things, tell us what we have to change in order to manage the risk, in order to give a more compelling case for a return on investment, and we will do so. So it's not just we demand this, it's also a counter offer to say what should we change in order to secure the funding for that compelling catalytical projects.
That's great, and a lot of our cities are asking for that direct access to finance, but with that direct access comes the responsibility, that comes demonstrating sound financial management, and that you are a good partner for taking on those loans. So we're going to open it up now to questions. We have 13 minutes. Is that right? So happy to take. Do we have a microphone? There we go. And please introduce yourself and let us know if there's anyone in particular you'd like to ask a question to.
Thank you. I'm Louise Postma. I work for Sustainable Solution Africa, and we support project preparation and do a lot of capacity building for actors to access climate finance. Just wanted to say that I really enjoyed all the presentations, and I'm really excited about the green shares. My question is for the mayor. I was wondering if you have any specific initiatives or channels related to accessing climate finance that you feel are most effective and that we can learn from and maybe scale up more.
Right, so existing projects, basically. That.
Or channels.
Existing funds or channels to access climate finance, like what works best for the cities to get climate finance to them at the moment, from your experience?
Well, South Africa has got such problems with creditworthiness of especially local government. There's such a backlog of infrastructure, so any funding, quite frankly, is welcome, whatever the channel is and whatever fits within our existing framework of municipal laws. But the most realistic, I think, would be project-based funding to look at the merits of specific projects. And to us, the number one priority as a country is energy. We've got our national energy monopoly that is, I see their logo is here, so I don't want to say. Financial and institutional collapse. And for cities have to step into the space of generating and procuring from IPPs. IPPs need to build up volume so that we can get it at the prices that we're getting it from the national energy utility. And that should be the focus, and we are willing to do very, very innovative and drastic and bold things in order to fund some of our initiatives, which includes at least one of our existing mothballed power stations that belong to the city. We want to generate renewable electricity from that. It's got an inlet into the grid. It's called the Pretoria West Power Station. So that would be a practical example of what we want to achieve.
And I think that's a really great example, because for those who have not traveled or lived in South Africa, and I don't live there, I live in London, but I'm constantly on the phone with my colleagues in South Africa saying, oh, hang on, there's a brownout, let me make sure my computer's charged. It's a constant aspect of daily life, and it's a tremendous impact on livelihoods, on productivity, on the city's resilience when you don't have 24/7
It puts
power.
an absolute cap on economic growth. We
Exactly.
can't grow bigger than 1.5% GDP without more electricity. So it is the most important project for us.
And we need to support the city so that they can develop their own sources. Okay, more questions from the audience.
Hi, I'm Sachin Boite. I'm the Director for Climate Resilience for C40 Cities. Great to hear Shana's commitment to mainstream climate action through their climate budgeting. My question specifically is about adaptation. And it could be multiple panelists who could answer this. What could be specific criteria that cities could develop to access finance, particularly for adaptation within their municipal budgets?
Sach, could you repeat? Sorry, it got a little loud. Or maybe speak closer.
Yes, sorry. The question is, how could cities adjust or apply to specific criteria for accessing finance for adaptation, particularly nature-based solutions?
Okay, who'd like to take that on? Maggie?
I think this speaks a lot to the point I made first, which is around additionality. So if you look at most of the global climate funds at the moment that would fund adaptation, GCF is one example, they're going to first ask, what are the climate change projections for your city? And this is one of the big challenges, particularly if we look outside of South Africa, which has got very good weather station coverage and very good clear understanding of climate change impacts at quite a localized level. There is, for instance, something called the Green Book that has got 8 by 8 kilometer squares of clear climate impacts in South Africa, which is unheard of outside of South Africa. But if you look at the rest of Africa, that's relatively unheard of. So, it's almost a counter answer to your question to say I feel, that needs to seriously be looked at as a criteria for accessing those funds. And for us, really, the criteria should simply be, with very high-level understanding of what the climate change impacts are going to be in your city. So we know in most African contexts it's going to get hotter. It's just by how much hotter. And read the IPCC's chapter on Africa with disdain if you want to know what it's going to look like if we cross 1.5 or cross 2 degrees Celsius globally, which is looking very, very likely. But to look at these scenarios in terms of it really will be hotter and wetter or hotter and drier, and then understand what that will mean for your current development trajectory. And I think there's a lot that municipalities and cities are already doing that could be targeted adaptation just with slight changes to how it is implemented. And so I think the question now needs to be going back to particularly the main donors in the adaptation space and really asking them more than the cities to be looking at their criteria for accessing those funds to make it more accessible to more and more cities that really do need the finance. And it's often the smallest municipalities where the impacts are greatest.
Alok?
Yeah, so at the JEF, in addition to working on leading the cities program, I also work on the adaptation funds that we have. We have 2 adaptation funds, the Least Developed Countries Fund, which provides supports to the least developed countries, and the Special Climate Change Fund, which aims to catalyze innovation for adaptation. So, in terms of criteria, I think Megan has already elaborated well, but from our perspective, from donors' perspective, what we look at as criteria is that absolutely that you need to make it clearly science-based, that you have the baseline, you have a very clear, theory of change of how the investments would lead to, transformative adaptation. We look at 3 things. One is, the solutions, how because adaptation is not like mitigation. Right? You have a very clear solution which is resulting in GHG reduction. You can count, you can report. Adaptation is complex. So what we look at is, are you introducing adaptation-specific solutions? Like, if a city doesn't have early warning systems or data mechanism to capture climate data, those kind of interventions can easily qualify as an adaptation project. The second is, investments like, investments in energy, water, and others. Is climate information, climate risk integrated in that, and, seeking funds to build those resilient infrastructure systems. So that's the second type of, solutions that we look at. And third is broader policy level, mandates like the climate budgeting and other processes, which, supports adaptation at a much macro level, economy-wide adaptation. So, these are, different types of projects. Adaptation, to be honest, is very difficult to define criteria for adaptation. It's really, how you make a very clear case that people, ecosystem, economy is vulnerable to climate change and its projections, and how through multiple approaches you achieve transformative, outcomes. So that's how it works. Yeah.
Super. I think we're going to draw to a close because our next session looks very interested in coming into the room. So I want to thank the panelists. That was a really amazing conversation. Fantastic to hear from some of the innovations coming from the banks, the green share, the tapping into institutional investors, prioritizing subnationals in the country strategies. We've heard from the mayor of some of very real policy challenges, some of the challenges with outdated infrastructure, with the the new approaches that are needed in terms of finding solutions to these issues and the very real support cities need that like Schwane, that are facing this creditworthiness challenge as well. And then we've heard about the importance of integration, the spatial nature, the institutional, the development and climate agenda, the need for mainstreaming climate in everything that a city is doing and how they approach infrastructure projects, including the climate budget initiative, which Schwane also announced a couple weeks ago. So thank you so much. It's been a really great conversation. I want to thank also DBSA for bringing this fantastic panel together. I hope, the Mayor, you have some good conversations with DBSA as well. Sounds like there might be a lot to talk about. Thank you so much, everyone.